In this tutorial, I'd like to talk about CSS gradients and then also shadows. And I'm working under the CSS Advanced heading on the w3schools.com website. And there are a lot of different things that I would recommend you try out and see if you want to incorporate into your website, your next project. You're not going to be required to incorporate everything that you see, and I'm obviously not going to record a tutorial on every single one of these. I'm just picking out some things that you might find useful and also might help with the overall appearance of your site. So if you're looking at CSS gradients, this gives you a way to incorporate a gradient into a certain area of your site. Now you could use this for a full screen background, but I would recommend using an image instead because it's hard to get the gradient background to look right. This is more for a certain area of your page where a background might improve the design a little bit. It'll make it a little more interesting, add some depth to the site. And it's pretty easy to do here. So the two that I'll show you, the gradients and then the shadows. The gradients I think you'll use, I use that quite a bit. The shadows not so much, but I think it's good to look at some of these as well just so you can see how they work. But let's look at a gradient here, and let's say if we take this site that we've been working on, we just did the drop downs in the previous tutorial. Let's say at the top of the header right here, we want to add a gradient in this area, and we don't want something that's too bold. When you're thinking about adding gradients, you want it to be really subtle. You don't really want to draw attention to it, just something that's going to help the look of the site overall, but not draw attention to itself. So we'll just add the gradient in here. So if you want to click on the CSS gradients on W3 Schools, you'll see a lot of different options here. They use pretty bold colors just to show, to make a point so you can see it. You wouldn't want to use anything like that, obviously. But this is probably the one that would make the most sense. It's a linear gradient. Linear means in a straight line. Two colors blending in one straight line, and by default it's going to blend from top to bottom, so it starts red, transitions into yellow, and here's the code for it. Notice that it's within a division tag named gradient or grad, so we'll put ours inside of like a CSS class or division tag. I'll see what we'll use here in a second. Now there are a lot of other options under this site if you want to try them out. If you want it to go left to right, you can see that it actually has some code in there to go to the right. There's diagonal, there's radial, there's multiple colors. You can see if you want it to have three colors, red, yellow, green, all three of them. So you're getting into sort of styles that you probably would not use, in my opinion. I mean, I can't really think of a reason why you'd want to blend 4 or 5 colors in a line, this kind of thing as well. And here's radial. So anyway, you just be the judge and incorporate it into your site. We're just going to do the simplest one here at the top. So this is the code that we want right here. So we're just going to grab this right in the middle because we already have some CSS where this is going to go. So it's going to go up here at the top behind where it says basic CSS layout. Let me come back to my brackets program, and I'm going to use my CSS style sheet, and I want to look for the header. So if you've named everything correctly, it should be pretty easy to find. So up here at the top I've got a .header class, and then that's where I've got the text align center, padding on there, but I don't really have any style. So I'm just going to paste that in there. So I'm just going to put it right there. Background image, put a space so you can see it a little better. Linear gradient, red, yellow. Now we don't want to use those colors, so let's switch over here to htmlcolorcodes.com, and let's use a light blue to white, and just again something that's very subtle here. So let's say I'll use this hexadecimal color right there. So instead of the red color, we want to use the hexadecimal that we just picked out. So I'll paste that right in here. If it does put any extra spaces, just make sure you take those out. And then instead of yellow, let's just use white. And instead of typing the word, we'll just keep it consistent, and we'll use the hexadecimal color or the hexadecimal value for white. Let's do a file, save all. And now let's come over here and refresh. And you can see how it has a nice gradient here that sort of fits the style of the site and adds a little bit of depth back there. It just simply blends the blue that we picked at the top, into white right there. So it does provide some depth, and I think would help the site look a little bit better as we start to add some images. So that is your simple way to add a CSS gradient. Now let's take a look at shadows, the next one down here, and you can see that you can add shadows on pretty much anything you want. One thing I would check with everything that you're doing with CSS, make sure you test in multiple browsers. A lot of these things that you see here, they typically did not work in every browser, and it's a little better these days with all the new browsers. They seem to support most of what you see here, but it still helps. It's still going to help you out if you test in multiple versions, different browsers. But shadows, it's exactly what you see right here. So what we'll do, let's just add a text shadow on here. So maybe a drop shadow, something we can see. So here's a shadow, and you can see that it is 2 pixels by 2 pixels red, and it's on an H1. So I'm going to grab all of this code, and I'm going to put this into my CSS, and it's going to affect all of the H1 tags. Now you could change that to H2 or 3 or just paragraph text if you want to see what this is going to do. But I'll go ahead and copy this, come back here, make sure I'm on my styles.css, and then just drop this in here somewhere where you can find it. You know, if you need to get back to it, I'll put it up here at the top so I can see it, and paste it in here. Okay, and so it has the text shadow, 2 pixels by 2 pixels. It's basically a drop shadow. So that means any H1 within the entire site is going to have this red shadow on it. So I'll do File, Save All over here and refresh. And you can see now the title has a drop shadow on it. So it's really that simple to start applying some of these effects. If you change this around, let's say, you know, grays probably would be a little better color here. And let's see what 4 pixels by 4 pixels does. So I'll save all, refresh. And that's a little bit too far away from the actual text. So if you come back here and change that, just do 1 by 1. When you're doing any of these effects, what I would recommend is to think subtle. You know, this looks really nice to me. It just makes the text stand out just a little bit for the title. Not too much, so you don't really know what's happening there, but it does have some depth now to it. Makes it a little more interesting to look at. So you can play around with these if you want. A lot of different shadows and things to try out, and then they do get into images and boxes as well. Now the boxes, that's something that I really don't use very often. I think that's kind of an outdated look in my opinion. Anytime you get that big of a drop shadow around a box, it's just an outdated look, and you know, maybe it'll come back at some point. But generally, you know, more two-dimensional solid colors, not as much depth here, is a little more up to date. But depends on what kind of site you're building, and you know, maybe you could integrate this in to images the way they have done here. Some of these look kind of cool, so you could try these out if you want. But that's going to be CSS Gradients and Shadows.